Did you remove the silver skin, check its temperature, and probe it with a fork? No, we're not talking about dissecting an alien. We're talking sweet, sweet ribs, baby. There are a few key elements to be aware of when you purchase your rack of ribs. Firstly, if you're going for pork ribs, you'll likely be getting one of two common types: spare ribs or back ribs. Spare ribs come from the belly just like bacon, while back ribs are cut from the loin, where you also get pork chops. Back ribs are smaller, more tender, and cook faster, while spare ribs are meatier, fattier, and thus able to retain more flavor. Beef ribs also comprise of two common types: short and back ribs. Short ribs are cut from the chuck, brisket, plate, and rib areas of the cattle, while back ribs are cut from behind the shoulder. Not only do short ribs vary based on the specific area from which they are cut, but how they are cut also matters. Nevertheless, what really sets them apart is that they have a lot more meat on the bones, as back ribs are what you get after the rib roast has been removed. Regardless of which ribs you purchase, you want to ensure that the bones on the racks are well covered with meat, avoiding those with surface areas only covered with fat. When it comes to quality, you'll also see that fresh ribs rather than frozen ones are your best bet. Before you even think about doing anything else with your ribs, you'll want to remove the membrane from the back of the ribs first. This is the layer of white skin, also known as silverskin or caul fat. This layer is made of elastin and helps hold the organs in place. While this membrane can be found on various cuts and on all ribs, you'll especially want to remove it from baby back ribs. Since back ribs are located close to the spine, the membrane here is often thicker and thus much tougher than on other cuts. There are a few basic methods to remove the membrane. You can use a paper towel, knife, or chopsticks. With the paper towel method, you use the paper towels to hold on to one end of the rack of ribs. Then, with your dominant hand, start to peel the membrane away from one corner of the rack as you gently slide your fingers between the bones and membrane, working your way across to remove it in one piece. The knife method involves inserting a knife beneath the membrane and sliding it across the rack of ribs. Finally, the chopstick method works similarly to the knife method, except it's done using a metal chopstick. Most people associate ribs with basting, which some might assume entails simply marinating them to produce the best flavor. However, a wet or dry coating has different effects on the flavor and texture of your ribs, and certain coating styles are best for specific types of ribs. According to Barbecue Host, wet marinades make the meat more tender, while dry rubs better intensify the flavor and create a crispy layer on the exterior. Since back ribs are often leaner, they benefit most from dry rubs, while other types of ribs can be marinated. Besides these tips, the way you season and coat your ribs is really up to you. The most important aspect to keep in mind is to avoid marinating ribs for more than 24 hours, as the acid in the marinade can break down the proteins in the meat and result in an unpleasant texture. If you forget to marinate them entirely, you can simply use a dry rub and add moisture by basting the meat during the cooking process. If you're feeling especially experimental, you can also brine the ribs, which entails placing them in a saltwater solution and leaving them to soak for 4 to 24 hours. If you do brine them, it's important not to marinate them as well, as they may become too salty. Ribs are best cooked slowly and at a low temperature, but if you're looking to achieve
the ultimate ribs,
pre-cooking them is an absolute must. Pre-cooking the ribs a day or two beforehand shortens their eventual cooking time. However, more than that, it also develops the complexity of the flavor you'll enjoy later. This is because partially cooking and leaving the ribs in the refrigerator allows them to marinate with the bone marrow and melted connective tissues that are released in the first step. To pre-cook the ribs, you can either bake or boil them. With the first method, simply preheat the oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit and season the ribs with a spice rub of your choice. Then wrap each rack in aluminum foil, place them in a roasting pan, and bake them for about 2 to 3 hours until they're tender. Following that, rewrap the ribs in foil and grill them for another 30 minutes. Boiling is a better option when you don't have as much time. Simply place the ribs in a large pot, cover the meat with water, and bring it to a light boil on medium heat for about 25 to 30 minutes. Then simply season and grill the meat to finish. There are several tests to figure out whether or not your ribs are done. The time test is clear and simple and uses the help of a good old-fashioned kitchen timer. The general rule of thumb is to cook the ribs in the oven at 225 degrees Fahrenheit. Baby back ribs will take approximately 3 to 4 hours, while meatier cuts will take 5 to 6 hours. A toothpick test will tell you that the ribs are done if you can skewer the rack in different spots with no resistance. The pop-up test is quite subjective, as it stipulates that the ribs are done if the meat has contracted enough that only 1/4 inch of the bone is sticking out. The flexibility test simply means that the meat comes off the bone easily, while the bend test involves picking the rack up with tongs and seeing whether the ends start separating. If all else fails, there's the tried and true peekaboo and taste test, where you simply cut off a slice and let your taste buds be the judge.
Oh, well, these ribs are delicious.
If you're baking the ribs in the oven, the ideal temperature is between 225 and 300 degrees Fahrenheit. This not only allows the meat to cook slowly, but it keeps it tender and succulent as it bakes. While a lower temperature may take longer, it's always worth it if you have the extra hour or two to spare. The rules are a little different if you're cooking the ribs on the grill, and a properly calibrated thermometer is your best bet. You'll need to probe your rib racks to determine if the internal temperature is just right. Ribs are considered done as soon as the internal temperature hits 145 degrees Fahrenheit. However, between 190 and 200 degrees Fahrenheit, the meat should fall off the bone. If you prefer to leave them on the grill for a while longer, just note that as the internal temperature increases beyond 200 degrees Fahrenheit, the texture of the meat will shift toward the leathery end of the spectrum. There are plenty of convenient uses for a set of tongs, but sometimes it seems easier to simply reach for a fork in those moments when the tongs are too far. Because hey, what does it matter when all you're doing is flipping a little meat on the grill, right?
Wrong, 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 wrong.
That's right. When it comes to flipping ribs, this is a detail that matters more than you might realize. Using a pair of quality tongs will not only ensure you have a good grip on the rack of ribs for every flip, but it also means you won't have to keep puncturing holes in the meat. Poking it once with a toothpick or a probe to determine the internal temperature may be inconsequential. However, ongoing punctures throughout the cooking process let moisture and flavor seep into the grill rather than remain locked in the ribs. If you have to go out and get your first pair of tongs, spring-loaded and flexible tongs are recommended, as they allow for a firmer grip and greater ease of use. There is just something about that sticky sauce on ribs. It's messy, delicious, and quite frankly, one of the parts many people most relish about digging into a rack of ribs. While you may see some cooks brushing on the sauce as they grill, it's vital to note that not all sauces are made the same. That's because mopping sauce is different from the barbecue sauce you brush onto the meat toward the end. It also has very little or no sugar, hence it won't cause the ribs to burn or have any foul flavor if you add it during the cooking process. When you start basting your meat with barbecue sauce largely depends on the type of meat you're grilling. While you can apply barbecue sauce to chicken about 10 to 15 minutes into cooking, beef can be sauced before you start cooking it, and pork should wait until the end. However, the absolute best time to add sauce to ribs is 10 to 15 minutes before they are done if you're using a tangy sauce. If you're using barbecue sauce, you can go up to 30 minutes before they are ready. The crucial point is not to mop them too early, as the sugars in the sauce can crystallize and burn, which almost always ends up with an unpleasant flavor that cannot be masked. Do you have a lot of friends?
Do they like ribs?
If they have a pulse, they probably do. And if they don't, they shouldn't be your friends anyway.
You don't win friends with salad. You don't win friends with salad.
You've taken all this time, care, and effort to prepare succulent slabs of ribs that are now waiting to be dug into. The worst thing that could happen at this point is finding out that you haven't made enough to go around. You want your family and friends to get their share, but more importantly, because you have created an absolute masterpiece, you want them to have enough for the countless requests for seconds that will obviously follow. Fortunately, this is an issue you can easily prevent. There are two factors to consider: the type of meat you're serving, and secondly, whether you're making ribs as the primary or secondary meat in your overall meal. If they are the star of your meal, you'll want to prepare about 4 or 5 spare beef ribs per person, or 2 to 3 beef back ribs per person. And of course, more if it's pork since they're smaller. In the end, however, this is highly subjective, so just get all the ribs you want, especially now that they are bound to be utterly delicious.